The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Book 5. The Horse and His Boy. Chapter 13. The Fight at Anvard. By about 11 o'clock, the whole company was once more on the march, riding westward with the mountains on their left. Corin and Shasta rode right at the rear, with the giants immediately in front of them. Lucian, Edmund, and Peregrine were busy with their plans for the battle, and though Lucy once said, "But where is his Goosecap Highness?" Edmund only replied, "Not in the front, and that's good news enough. Leave well alone." Shasta told Corin most of his adventures and explained that he had learned all his riding from a horse and didn't really know how to use the reins. Corin instructed him in this, besides telling him all about their secret sailing from Tashbaan. "And where's the Queen Susan?" "At Cair Paravel," said Corin. "She's not like Lucy, you know, who's as good as a man, or at any rate as good as a boy. Queen Susan is more like an ordinary grown-up lady. She doesn't ride to the wars, though she is an excellent archer." The hillside path which they were following became narrower all the time, and the drop on their right hand became steeper. At last they were going in single file along the edge of a precipice, and Shasta shuddered to think that he had done that same last night without knowing it. "But of course," he thought, "I was quite safe. That is why the lion kept on my left. He was between me and the edge all the time." Then the path went left and south away from the cliff, and there were thick woods on both sides of it, and they went steeply up and up into the pass. There would have been a splendid view from the top if it were open ground, but among all those trees you could see nothing, only, every now and then, some huge pinnacle of rock above the treetops, and an eagle or two wheeling high up in the blue air. "They smell battle," said Corin, pointing at the birds. "They know we're preparing a feed for them." Shasta didn't like this at all. When they had crossed the neck of the pass and came a good deal lower, they reached more open ground, and from here Shasta could see all Archenland, blue and hazy, spread out below him, and even, he thought, a hint of the desert beyond it. But the sun, which had perhaps 2 hours or so to go before it set, was in his eyes, and he couldn't make things out distinctly. Here the army halted and spread out in a line, and there was a good deal of rearranging. A whole detachment of very dangerous-looking talking beasts, whom Shasta had not noticed before, and who were mostly of the cat kind, leopards, panthers, and the like, went padding and growling to take up their positions on the left. The giants were ordered to the right, and before going, they all took off something they had been carrying on their backs and sat down for a moment. Then Shasta saw that what they had been carrying and were now putting on were pairs of boots. Horrid, heavy, spiked boots, which came up to their knees. Then they sloped their huge clubs over their shoulders and marched to their battle position. The archers, which with Queen Lucy, fell to the rear, and you could first see them bending their bows, and then hear the twang-twang as they tested the strings. Wherever you looked, you could see people tightening girths, putting on helmets, drawing swords, and throwing cloaks to the ground. There was hardly any talking now. It was very solemn and very dreadful. "I'm in for it now. I really am in for it now," thought Shasta. Then there came noises far ahead, the sound of many men shouting, and a steady thud, thud, thud. "Battering ram," whispered Corin. "They're battering the gate." Even Corin looked quite serious now. "Why doesn't King Edmund get on?" he said. "I can't stand this waiting about. Chilly, too." Shasta nodded, hoping he didn't look as frightened as he felt. The trumpet at last! On the move now trotting, the banner streaming out in the wind. They had topped a low ridge now, and below them the whole scene suddenly opened out. A little, many-towered castle with its gate towards them. No moat, unfortunately, but of course the gate shut and the portcullis down. On the walls they could see, like little white dots, the faces of the defenders. Down below, about 50 of the Carlomenes, dismounted, were steadily swinging a great tree trunk against the gate. But at once the scene changed. The main bulk of Rabadash's men had been on foot already, ready to assault the gate. But now he had seen the Narnians sweeping down from the ridge. There is no doubt those Carlomenes are wonderfully trained. It seemed to Shasta only a second before a whole line of the enemy were on horseback again, wheeling round to meet them, swinging towards them. And now a gallop. The ground between the two armies grew less every moment. Faster, faster. All swords out now, all shields up to the nose, all prayers said, all teeth clenched. Shasta was dreadfully frightened, but it suddenly came into his head. If you funk this, you'll funk every battle all your life. Now or never. But when at last the two lines met, he had really very little idea of what happened. There was a frightful confusion and an appalling noise. His sword was not clean out of his hand pretty soon, and he'd got the reins tangled somehow. Then he found himself slipping. Then a spear came straight at him, and he ducked to avoid it. He rolled right off his horse, bashed his left knuckles terribly against someone else's armor, and then, well, but it's no use trying to describe the battle from Shasta's point of view. He understood too little of the fight in general, and even of his own part in it. The best way I can tell you what really happened is to take you some miles away to where the hermit of the southern march sat gazing into the smooth pool beneath the spreading tree, where Bree and Quinn and Aravis beside him. For it was in this pool that the hermit looked when he wanted to know what was going on in the world outside the green walls of his hermitage. There, as in a mirror, he could see, at certain times, what was going on in the streets of cities far further south than Tashban, or what ships were putting into Redhaven and the remote Seven Isles, or what robbers or wild beasts stirred in the great western forest between Lantern Waste and Telmar. And all this day he had hardly left his pool, even to eat or drink, for he knew that great events were afoot in Archenland. Aravis and the horses gazed into it too. They could see it was a magic pool. Instead of reflecting the tree and the sky, it revealed cloudy and colored shapes, moving, always moving, in its depths. But they could see nothing clearly. The hermit could, and from time to time he told them what he saw. A little while before Shasta rode into his first battle, the hermit had begun speaking like this. I see one, two, three eagles wheeling in the gap by Stormness Head. One is the oldest of all the eagles. He would not be out unless battle was at hand. I see him wheel to and fro, peering down sometimes at Anvard and sometimes to the east behind Stormness. Ah, I see now what Rabadash and his men have been so busy at all day. They have felled and lopped a great tree, and they are now coming out of the woods carrying it as a ram. They have learned something from the failure of last night's assault. He would have been wiser if he had set his men to make ladders, but it takes too long, and he is impatient. Fool that he is! He ought to have ridden back to Tashban as soon as the first attack failed, for his whole plan depended on speed and surprise. Now they are bringing their ram into position. King Loon's men are shooting hard from the walls. 5 Carlamines have fallen, but not many will. They will have their shields above their heads. Rabadash is giving his orders now. With him are his most trusted lords, fierce Tarkans from the eastern provinces. I can see their faces. There is Corridin of the Castle Tormont, and Nazru, and Shlamash, and Ilgramuth of the Twisted Lip, and a tall Tarkan with a crimson beard. By the mane, my old master Andrandin, said Bree. Shh, said Aravis. Now the ram has started. If I could hear as well as see, what a noise that would make. Stroke after stroke, and no gate can stand it forever. But wait! Something up by Stormness has scared the birds. They're coming out in masses. And wait again. I can't see yet. Ah, now I can. The whole ridge up on the east is black with horsemen. If only the wind would catch that standard and spread it out. They're over the ridge now, whoever they are. Aha! I've seen the banner now. Narnia! Narnia! It's the Red Lion. They're in full career down the hill now. I can see King Edmund. There's a woman behind among the archers. Oh! What is it? Asked Twin breathlessly. All his cats are dashing out from the left of the line. Cats, said Aravis. Great cats, leopards and such, the hermit said impatiently. I see, I see. The cats are coming round in a circle to get at the horses of the dismounted men. A good stroke. The Carloman horses are mad with terror already. Now the cats are in among them. But Rabadash has reformed his line and has 100 men in the saddle. They're riding to meet the Narnians. There's only 100 yards between the two lines now. Only 50. I can see King Edmund. I can see the Lord Peridon. There are two mere children in the Narnian line. What can the king be about to let them into the battle? Only 10 yards. The lines have met. The giants on the Narnian right are doing wonders, but one's down, shot through the eye, I suppose. The center's all in a muddle. I can see more on the left. There are two boys again. Lion alive, one is Prince Corin. The other, like him, is two peas. It's your little Shasta. Corin is fighting like a man. He's killed a Carloman. I can see a bit of the center now. Rabadash and Edmund almost met then, but the press has separated them. What about Shasta? Said Aravis. Oh, the fool, groaned the hermit. Poor, brave little fool. He knows nothing about this work. He's making no use at all of his shield. His whole side's exposed. He hasn't the faintest idea what to do with his sword, though he's remembered it now. He's waving it wildly about. Nearly cut his own pony's head off, and he will in a moment if he's not careful. It's been knocked out of his hand now. It's mere murder sending a child into the battle. He can't live 5 minutes. Duck, you fool! Oh, he's down. Killed? Asked three voices breathlessly. How can I tell? Said the hermit. The cats have done their work. All the riderless horses are dead or escaped now. No retreat for the Carlomines on them. Now the cats are turning back into the main battle. They're leaping on the ram's men. The ram is down. Oh, good, good. The gates are opening from the inside. There's going to be a sortie. The first three are out. It's King Lune in the middle. The brothers Dar and Darin on each side of him. Behind them are Tran and Shar and Cole with his brother Colin. There are 10, 20, nearly 30 of them out by now. The Carloman line is being forced back upon them. King Edmund is dealing marvelous strokes. He's just slashed Corridon's head off. Lots of Carlomines have thrown down their arms and are running for the woods. Those that remain are hard-pressed. The giants are closing in on the right, cats on the left, King Lune from their rear. The Carlomines are a little knot now, fighting back to back. Your Tarkin's down, Bree. Lune and Azura are fighting hand to hand. The king looks like winning. The king is keeping it up well. The king has won. Azura's down. King Edmund's down. No, he's up again. He's at it with Rabadash. They're fighting in the very gate of the castle. Several Carlomines have surrendered. Darin has killed Ilgamuth. I can't see what's happening to Rabadash. I think he's dead, leaning against the castle wall, but I don't know. Chalmash and King Edmund are still fighting, but the battle is over everywhere else. Chalmash has surrendered. The battle is over. The Carlomines are utterly defeated. When Shasta fell off his horse, he gave himself up for lost. But horses, even in battle, tread on human beings very much less than you would suppose. After a very horrible 10 minutes or so, Shasta realized suddenly that there were no longer any horses stamping about in the immediate neighborhood, and that the noise, for there were still a good many noises going on, was no longer that of a battle. He sat up and stared about him. Even he, little as he knew of battles, could soon see that the Archenlanders and Narnians had won. The only living Carlomines he could see were prisoners. The castle gates were wide open, and King Lune and King Edmund were shaking hands across the battering ram. From the circle of lords and warriors around them, there arose a sound of breathless and excited, but obviously cheerful conversation. And then, suddenly, it all united and swelled into a great roar of laughter. Shasta picked himself up, feeling uncommonly stiff, and ran towards the sound to see what the joke was. A very curious sight met his eyes. The unfortunate Rabadash appeared to be suspended from the castle walls. His feet, which were about 2 feet from the ground, were kicking wildly. His chain shirt was somehow hitched up so that it was horribly tight under the arms and came halfway over his face. In fact, he looked just as a man looks if you catch him in the very act of getting into a stiff shirt that is a little too small for him. As far as could be made out afterwards, and you may be sure the story was well talked over for many a day. What happened was something like this. Early in the battle, one of the giants had made an unsuccessful stamp at Rabadash with his spiked boot. Unsuccessful because it didn't crush Rabadash, which was what the giant had intended. But not quite useless because one of the spikes tore the chain mail, just as you or I might tear an ordinary shirt. So Rabadash, by the time he encountered Edmund at the gate, had a hole in the back of his hauberk. And when Edmund pressed him back nearer and nearer to the wall, he jumped up on a mounting block and stood there raining down blows on Edmund from above. But then, finding that his position, by raising him above the heads of everyone else, made him a mark for every arrow from the Narnian bows, he decided to jump down again. And he meant to look and sound. No doubt for a moment he did look and sound, very grand and very dreadful as he jumped, crying, "The bolt of Tash falls from above!" But he had to jump sideways because the crowd in front of him left him no landing place in that direction. And then, in the neatest way you could wish, the tear in the back of his hauberk caught on a hook in the wall. Ages ago, this hook had had a ring in it for tying horses to. And there he found himself, like a piece of washing hung up to dry, with everyone laughing at him. "Let me down, Edmund!" howled Rabadash. "Let me down and fight me like a king and a man! Or if you're too great a coward to do that, kill me at once!" "Certainly," began King Edmund, but King Loon interrupted. "By your majesty's good leave," said King Loon to Edmund. "Not so." Then turning to Rabadash, he said, "Your Royal Highness, if you had given that challenge a week ago, I'll answer for it that there was no one in King Edmund's dominion, from the High King down to the smallest talking mouse, who would have refused it. But by attacking our castle of Anvard in time of peace, without defiant scent, you have proved yourself no knight, but a traitor, and one rather to be whipped by the hangman than to be suffered to cross swords with any person of honor. Take him down, bind him, and carry him within till our pleasure is further known." Strong hands wrenched Rabadash's sword from him, and he was carried away into the castle, shouting, threatening, cursing, and even crying. For though he could have faced torture, he couldn't bear being made ridiculous. In Tashban, everyone had always taken him seriously. At that moment, Corin ran up to Shasta, seized his hand, and started dragging him towards King Loon. "Here he is, father, here he is!" cried Corin. "Aye, and here thou art at last," said the king in a very gruff voice, "and hast been in the battle clean contrary to your obedience. A boy to break a father's heart, and at your age a rod to your breech were fitter than a sword in your fist. Ha!" But everyone, including Corin, could see that the king was very proud of him. "Chide him no more, sire, if it please you," said Lord Darren. "His Highness would not be your son if he did not inherit your conditions. It would grieve your majesty more if he had reproved for the opposite fault." "Well, well," grumbled the king. "We'll pass it over for this time. And now—" What came next surprised Shasta as much as anything that had ever happened to him in his life. He found himself suddenly embraced in a bear-like hug by King Loon and kissed on both cheeks. Then the king set him down again and said, "Stand here together, boys, and let all the court see you. Hold up your heads. Now, gentlemen, look on them both. Has any man any doubts?" And still Shasta could not understand why everyone stared at him and at Corin, nor what all the cheering was about. The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. Book 5, The Horse and His Boy. Chapter 14, How Bree Became a Wiser Horse. We must now return to Aravis and the horses. The hermit, watching his pool, was able to tell them that Shasta was not killed or even seriously wounded, for he saw him get up and saw how affectionately he was greeted by King Loon. But he could only see, not hear. He did not know what anyone was saying, and once the fighting had stopped and the talking had begun, it was not worthwhile looking in the pool any longer. Next morning, while the hermit was indoors, the three of them discussed what they should do next. "I've had enough of this," said Hwin. "The hermit has been very good to us, and I'm very much obliged to him, I'm sure. But I'm getting as fat as a pet pony, eating all day and getting no exercise. Let's go on to Narnia."
"No, not today, ma'am," said Bree. "I wouldn't hurry things. Some other day, don't you think?"
"We must see Shasta first and say goodbye to him and apologize," said Aravis.
"Exactly," said Bree with great enthusiasm. "Just what I was going to say."
"Oh, of course," said Hwin. "I expect he's in Anvard. Naturally, we'd look in on him and say goodbye. But that's on our way, and why shouldn't we start at once? After all, I thought it was Narnia we all wanted to get to." "I suppose so," said Aravis. She was beginning to wonder what exactly she would do when she got there, and was feeling a little lonely.
Of course," said Bree hastily. "Well, there's no need to rush things, if you know what I mean."
"No, I don't know what you mean," said Hwin. "Why don't you want to go?"
muttered Bree. "Well, don't you see, ma'am? It's an important occasion, returning to one's country, entering society, the best society. It is so essential to make a good impression. Not perhaps looking quite ourselves yet, eh?"
Hwin broke out into a hoarse laugh. "It's your tail, Bree. I see it all now. You want to wait till your tail's grown again, and we don't even know if tails are worn long in Narnia. Really, Bree, you're as vain as that Tarkahina in Tashban." "You are silly, Bree," said Aravis.
"By the lion's mane, Tarkahina! I am nothing of the sort," said Bree indignantly. "I have a proper respect for myself and for my fellow horses, that's all."
"Bree," said Aravis, who was not very interested in the cut of his tail, "I've been wanting to ask you something for a long time. Why do you keep on swearing by the lion and by the lion's mane? I thought you hated lions."
"And so I do," answered Bree. "But when I speak of the lion, of course I mean Aslan, the great deliverer of Narnia who drove away the witch in the winter. All Narnians swear by him."
"But is he a lion?"
No, of course not," said Bree in a rather shocked voice.
"All the stories about him in Tashban say he is," replied Aravis. "And if he isn't a lion, why do you call him a lion?"
"Well, you'd hardly understand that at your age," said Bree. "I was only a little fool when I left, so I don't quite fully understand it myself."
Bree was standing with his back to the green wall while he said this, and the other two were facing him. He was talking in a rather superior tone, with his eyes half shut. That is why he didn't see the changed expression on the faces of Hwin and Aravis. They had good reason to have open mouths and staring eyes, because while Bree spoke, they saw an enormous lion leap up from outside and balance himself on the top of the green wall. Only it was a brighter yellow, and it was bigger and more beautiful and more alarming than any lion they had ever seen. And at once it jumped down inside the wall and began approaching Bree from behind. It made no noise at all, and Hwin and Aravis couldn't make any noise themselves, no more than if they were frozen.
"No doubt," continued Bree, "when they speak of him as a lion, they only mean he's as strong as a lion, or, to our enemies, of course, as fierce as a lion, or something of that kind. Even a little girl like you, Aravis, must see that it would be quite absurd to suppose he is a real lion. Indeed, it would be disrespectful. If he was a lion, he'd have to be a beast, just like the rest of us. Why," and here Bree began to laugh, "if he was a real lion, he'd have 4 paws and a tail and whiskers. Help!"
For just as he said the word whiskers, one of Aslan's had actually tickled his ear. Bree shot away like an arrow to the other side of the enclosure, and there turned, the wall too high for him to jump, and he could fly no further. Aravis and Hwin both stared back. There was about a second of intense silence. Then Hwin, though shaking all over, gave a strange little neigh and trotted across to the lion.
Please, she said, you're so beautiful. You may eat me if you like. I'd sooner be eaten by you than fed by anyone else.
Dearest daughter,
said Aslan, planting a lion's kiss on her twitching velvet nose.
I knew you would not be long in coming to me. Joy shall be yours.
Then he lifted his head and spoke in a louder voice.
Now, Bree,
he said,
you poor, proud, frightened horse, draw near. Nearer still, my son. Do not dare not to dare. Touch me, smell me. Here are my paws. Here is my tail. These are my whiskers. I am a true beast.
Aslan,
said Bree in a shaken voice,
I'm afraid I must be rather a fool.
Happy the horse who knows that while he is still young, or the human either. Draw near, Aravis, my daughter. See, my paws are velveted. You will not be torn this time.
This time, sir,
said Aravis.
It was I who wounded you,
said Aslan.
I am the only lion you met in all of your journeyings. Do you know why I tore you?
No, sir.
The scratches on your back, tear for tear, throb for throb, blood for blood, were equal to the stripes laid on the back of your stepmother's slave because of the drugged sleep you cast upon her. You needed to know what it felt like.
Yes, sir. Please.
Ask on, my dear,
said Aslan.
Will any more harm come to her by what I did?
Child,
said the lion.
I am telling you your story, not hers. No one is told any story but their own.
Then he shook his head and spoke in a lighter voice.
Be merry, little ones,
he said.
We shall meet again soon, but before that you will have another visitor.
Then in one bound he reached the top of the wall and vanished from their sight. Strange to say, they felt no inclination to talk to one another about him after he had gone. They all moved slowly away to different parts of the quiet grass, and there paced to and fro, each alone, thinking. About half an hour later, the two horses were summoned to the back of the house to eat something nice that the hermit had got ready for them. And Aravis, still walking and thinking, was startled by the harsh sound of trumpets outside the gate.
Who is there?
asked Aravis.
His Royal Highness Prince Cor of Arkenland,
said a voice from outside. Aravis undid the door and opened it, drawing back a little way to let the strangers in. Two soldiers with halberds came first and took their stand at each side of the entry. Then followed a herald and the trumpeter.
His Royal Highness Prince Cor of Arkenland desires an audience of the Lady Aravis, said the herald.
Then he and the trumpeter drew aside and bowed, and the soldiers saluted, and the prince himself came in, while his attendants withdrew and closed the gate behind them. The prince bowed, and a very clumsy bow for a prince it was. Aravis curtsied in the Carloman style, which is not at all like ours, and did it very well because, of course, she had been taught how. Then she looked up and saw what sort of person this prince was. She saw a mere boy. He was bareheaded, and his fair hair was encircled with a very thin band of gold, hardly thicker than a wire. His upper tunic was of white cambric, as fine as a handkerchief, so that the bright red tunic underneath it showed through. His left hand, which rested on his emerald sword hilt, was bandaged. Aravis looked twice at his face before she gasped and said, "Why,
It's Shasta!
Shasta all at once turned very red and began speaking very quickly.
Look here, Aravis, he said. I do hope you won't think I got up like this, and the trumpeter and all, to try to impress you or make out that I'm different or any rot of that sort, because I'd far rather have come in my old clothes, but they're burnt now, and my father said, Your father? Said Aravis. Oh, apparently King Loon is my father, said Shasta. I might really have guessed it, Corin being so like me. We were twins, you see. Oh, and my name isn't Shasta, it's Cor. Cor is a nicer name than Shasta, said Aravis. Brothers' names run like that in Archenland, said Shasta, or Prince Cor, as we must now call him. Like Dar and Darin, Cole and Colin, and so on. Shasta, I mean Cor, said Aravis. Now, no, shut up. There's something I've got to say at once. I'm sorry I've been such a pig, but I did change before I knew you were a prince. Honestly, I did. When you went back and faced the lion. It wasn't really going to kill you at all, that lion, said Cor. I know, said Aravis, nodding. Both were still and solemn for a moment, as each saw that the other knew about Aslan. Suddenly, Aravis remembered Cor's bandaged hand. I say, she cried, I forgot. You have been in a battle. Is that a wound? A mere scratch, said Corin, using for the first time a rather lordly tone. But a moment later, he burst out laughing and said, If you want to know the truth, it isn't a proper wound at all. I only took the skin off my knuckles, just as any clumsy fool might do without going near a battle. Still, you were in the battle, said Aravis. It must have been wonderful. It wasn't at all like what I thought, said Cor. But Cor, I mean, you haven't told me anything yet about King Loon and how he found out who you were. Well, let's sit down, said Cor, for it's rather a long story. And by the way, Father's an absolute brick. I'd be just as pleased, or very nearly, at finding he was my father even if he weren't a king. Even though education and all sorts of horrible things are going to happen to me. But you want the story. Well, Corin and I are twins. About a week after we were both born, apparently, they took us to a wise old centaur in Narnia to be blessed or something. Now, this centaur was a prophet, as a good many centaurs are. Perhaps you haven't seen any centaurs yet. There were some in the battle yesterday. Most remarkable people, but I can't say I feel quite at home with them yet. I say, Aravis, there are going to be a lot of things to get used to in these northern countries. Yes, there are, said Aravis. But get on with the story. Well, as soon as he saw Corin and me, it seems the centaur looked at me and said, A day will come when the boy will save Archenland from the deadliest danger in which ever she lay. And so, of course, my father and mother were very pleased. But there was someone present who wasn't. This was a chap called the Lord Barr, who had been father's Lord Chancellor. Apparently he'd done something wrong, beazling or some word like that. I didn't understand that part very well, and father had to dismiss him. But nothing else was done to him, and he was allowed to go on living in Archenland. But he must have been as bad as he could be, for it came out afterwards they had been in the pay of the Tisroc and had sent a lot of secret information to Tashban. So as soon as he heard I was going to save Archenland from a great danger, he decided I must be put out of the way. Well, he succeeded in kidnapping me, I don't exactly know how, and rode away down the winding Arrow to the coast. He'd had everything prepared, and there was a ship manned with his own followers lying ready for him, and he put out to sea with me on board. But father got wind of it, though not quite in time, and was after him as quickly as he could. The Lord Barr was already at sea when father reached the coast, but not out of sight, and father was embarked in one of his own warships within 20 minutes. It must have been a wonderful chase. There were 6 days following Barr's galleon and brought her to battle on the 7th. It was a great sea fight. I heard a lot about it yesterday evening. From 10 o'clock in the morning till sunset. Our people took the ship in the end, but I wasn't there. The Lord Barr himself had been killed in the battle, but one of his men said that early that morning, as soon as he saw he was certain to be overhauled, Barr had given me to one of his knights and sent us both away on the ship's boat, and that boat was never seen again. But of course that was the same boat that Aslan, he seems to be at the back of all the stories, pushed ashore at the right place for Arish to pick me up.
I wish I knew that knight's name, for he must have kept me alive and starved himself to do it. I suppose Aslan would say that was part of someone else's story, said Aravis. I was forgetting that, said Cor. And I wonder how the prophecy will work out, said Aravis, and what the great danger is that you're to save Archenland from. Well, said Cor rather awkwardly, they seem to think I've done it already. Aravis clapped her hands. Why, of course, she said. How stupid I am, and how wonderful! Archenland can never be in much greater danger than it was when Rabadash had crossed the Arrow with his 200 horse and you hadn't yet got through with your message. Don't you feel proud? I think I feel a bit scared, said Cor. And you'll be living in Anvard now, said Aravis rather wistfully. Oh, said Cor, I'd nearly forgotten what I came about. Father wants you to come and live with us. He says there's been no lady in the court. They call it the court. I don't know why. Since Mother died. Do, Aravis. You'll like Father. And Corin. They're not like me. They've been properly brought up. You needn't be afraid that. Oh, stop it, said Aravis, or we'll have a real fight. Of course I'll come. Now let's go and see the horses, said Cor. There was a great and joyous meeting between Bree and Cor, and Bree, who was still a rather subdued frame of mind, agreed to set out for Anvard at once. He and Hwin would cross into Narnia on the following day. All four bade an affectionate farewell to the hermit and promised that they would visit him again soon. By about the middle of the morning, they were on their way. The horses had expected that Aravis and Cor would ride, but Cor explained that, except in war, where everyone must do what he can do best, no one in Narnia or Archenland ever dreamed of mounting a talking horse. This reminded poor Bree again of how little he knew about Narnian customs and what dreadful mistakes he might make. So while Hwin strolled along in a happy dream, Bree got more nervous and more self-conscious with every step he took. Buck up, Bree, said Cor. It's far worse for me than for you. You aren't going to be educated. I shall be learning reading and writing and heraldry and dancing and history and music, while you'll be galloping and rolling on the hills of Narnia to your heart's content.
Well, that's just the point, groaned Bree. Do talking horses roll? Supposing they don't. I can't bear to give it up. What do you think, Hwin?
I'm going to roll anyway, said Hwin. I don't suppose any of them will care 2 lumps of sugar whether you roll or not.
Are we near the castle?
Said Bree to Cor. Round the next bend, said the prince.
Well, said Bree, I'm going to have a good one now. It may be the last. Wait for me a minute.
It was 5 minutes before he rose again, blowing hard and covered with bits of bracken.
Now I'm ready,
he said in a voice of profound gloom.
Lead on, Prince Cor. Narnia and the North.
But he looked more like a horse going to a funeral than a long-lost captive returning to home and freedom.